Hello everyone
Hello, everyone.
and welcome back to our data engineering session. In this session, we are going to learn how we should write the ETL code using Python. In the last session, we saw the theoretical concepts related to ETL, how we should be extracting data from a source system. We understood the concept of incremental and full extract. Similarly, we learned how we should load the data in the warehouse, the concept of data mart, the month end process, the year end process, and so forth. Now, I'm going to explain the structure, the thought process. Jumping into a ETL coding is a very easy way. However, if you have much more structured approach, in that case, it will become much easier for you to perform ETL. So I'm going to give the thought process an idea on how you can make your ETL codes easy and simple. We understand when we do ETL, we will have source and we can have multiple source systems from where we may have to get the data. The source may be a database, or it may be a file system, or it may be a internet from where we may have to pull the data. So from these sources, we write the logic of extraction. Now, whenever we do extraction, we understand we will do either incremental or full extract. So the point is, when my Python code, I'm trying to explain using a Python programming. When my Python code tries to extract data from this source system, say there is a table T1. For this table T1, we give it a task name. For any data that has to be extracted, we have to give it two things. The source name. Now, this source database is one. However, from this source database, we may have to extract T1, T2, T3. We will give separate name for each of the table that is being extracted from this source. So you may say this is source. So say, let's say this is source 1. This is source 2. This is say file source system 1. This is a web source system 1, whatever is the name. So you may give some source name saying that S1T1, some logical name you will have to give. And most often when you extract data from a source, the source name itself will become task name. Okay. However, when you have data and you are running some month end process, some week end process, or year end process, those tasks you will have to give some different names. However, when we extract a table from a given source, the process is to extract, transform, and load that table. In that case, quite often the source name will also become your task name. It is not necessary always the source name and task name should be same. So we have source name and task name. Now, when you're extracting the source, incremental extract, you need to know for this particular source, last modified information, last modified date time till which you have already extracted, and the row ID or the identifier last row ID, incremental row ID, which you have already extracted. So one code you will require is, you may write some function get last fetched info. This get last fetched info will take a input source ID. Source ID you will have to give. When you run the get last fetched info, it will provide you these information. What was the last modified date time and last row ID? Based on that, you can then run your incremental extract. So point one, you will require some function which will give you this data, get last fetched info. Now when the ETL process starts, there is a task of ETL which is starting. So you may have to, in your ETL process, you may want to set task initiation. So you may want to set task initiation. So you may want to write some function which will take task ID information or the task ID or the task name, whatever you call it. You will have to write some logic which will set the task initiation in your database. Let me try to explain this with a code example so you understand the point what I am trying to convey to you. Okay, here I'm showing some of my own code snippets which I have written to extract the Bhav copy data from Bombay Stock Exchange. Con, this piece of code which you can see is some function which I have written in the background which will give me a connection to my database where I want to store information. And in that database, I also have my task audit and source audit tables. Because I am starting the ETL process of getting data from a particular source, I set the task initiation. Now, what will this task initialization function do? Let me show you. The task initialization function, what it does it, from the task audit table, it gets what is the max ID. What is the current max ID? So if I can go here and show the task audit table, the last ID is 5394. If I run a SQL query on the table, it will return 5394. There was a some data management process, ETL process, which would have executed, and that ETL process would have created the task ID 5394. So this piece of code is going to fetch what is the last max ID, and I will increment it by 1 because this is the new process which is now ETL process I'm running. So my value will be 5395, and I will store data in the same table. If you can see task audit, I will make a insert entry in the same table with a new task ID 5395, and here the task name will come. The start date time will be entered because I've just started the task. The end date, how much time it took, how much records it fetched, and all other information will be empty. I have initiated, and I will set a flag that this code is now initialized, that the code ETL process is now running. That is the first step, initialization of the task. I come back here, my task has initialized. I will get what is the last processed date information, till which date I have already done data processing. As I mentioned, some places you may have date and time, in some places you may only have date. So in this, our requirement is only date. So I am going to get what is the last processed date. So this, again, you will have to write some generic codes. Last process date, if I can show, fetch last process date. Yeah, this will go in your audit table. This is source audit. There are two audit tables. One is a task audit and a source audit. Source audit is a very high level small table which will keep track of each source and till when the data has been extracted from that source. A task audit table will take care of each and every execution of ETL. On a daily basis, ETL happens. When the ETL happens, how much time it took for that task to complete, it will track all of that. Okay. So when I go and get the source audit for our source, which is BSC, where we are trying to extract, this is my source audit table for BSC specific. Here it will say, okay, we have got data till 19th of May. So if any further data has to be extracted, it has to be extracted after 19th of May onwards. So that is what the source audit table will do for you. Okay. Coming back to code. So first step, whenever you are doing ETL, initialize the task. Second, you fetch information of last ETL till what date data has been extracted. Then you write all the logic. Now this is all logic, all my business logic. You don't have to bother about what business logic, extraction, transformation, what you're doing. You don't have to bother about it. This is all logic. Once your ETL is success, what you need to do? You need to update the audit table. So again, you require some generic code. Why you need all of these functionalities to be created upfront? Because this functionalities you cannot keep writing for each and every ETL program for each and every different source. So here it will update that for this source, now we have extracted data till this date and time. So you update the source audit table. Having updated the source audit table, the last step would be update the task. Now, how will you know that the task that you have to update, what is the ID, for which ID you have to make the updation? You will come to know for which ID you have to do the updation is when you initialize the task, when you did the initialization of the task, you capture the task ID that was generated by this initialization step. So here if you see, when I initialized in the code task initialization, I returned the task ID. And what is this task ID? This task ID has this number. So I know when the task is completed, I have to, for this task initialized ID only, I have to update. So I can now run a update task saying that, okay, the task was successfully completed or it was not successfully completed. Okay. So if you have to summarize the way ETL process has to be returned, I can just say erase, or probably I'll do erase all ink. Whenever ETL starts, you need to do task initialization. Okay. You will say task initialization is for which task that you're doing. This task initialization step should initialize the task in your database and give you the task ID number, which you should store. After that, you should do fetch last ETL from the source audit table. You will have to give the source name, whatever source tag that you have given. This will give you information which may be last modified date time, or it may give you the last row ID, or both of that. Then you write your business logic, extraction, transformation logic. So this entire place, your business logic will come. After you have written, and when the code has successfully executed, you update the source audit. Now when you're updating the source audit, which source you want to update, and you will have to say last modified date time and last row ID depending upon your data. You will pass all of these as a parameter, and finally you will update the task. This task which was initialized here, you will update it, and the task ID you got it. So you know in database what is the name of what is the task ID number which you have to update. So based on that task ID you will update, and you will say, okay, the process was success, failure, and all of that. So this is how your code will work. Step 1, initialize the task, get the source, write the business logic, and then update, and then run this code. I hope the broad framework is understood. Moreover, what you have to also understand, When you're writing these codes, the warehouse, because what you will do is you will have these various sources from which you are going to do extraction, then you will do transformation, and then you will do the loading, and all of this will go in a particular warehouse. So what you have to also ensure that when you open the connection to this database, you should not keep writing the code of opening the connection in your business logic. Here my logic, I have all of this business logic to execute, extract, all of that is here. I should not keep writing the code of opening of the business logic here. My business logic, my code for opening the connection and all that should not come. You should make generic functionalities. So here, if you see one line syntax, get DB connection. One line syntax, it will directly get me the connection object to my data. Once I have the connection object, I want to insert data or execute something, I can simply say connection.execute. And finally, when all of the ETL has happened, you can simply go and say connection.close. Okay, that's how your coding should be. So at a high level, I have tried to explain the execution of a ETL code and how do you write the ETL code. You need to have generic functionalities. For example, generic functionalities like for task management, source updation, task initialization, updating the task when the process is complete, fetching what was the last process date time. All of these kind of generic functionalities you may have to write for your ETL program. Okay, you may have to write generic functionalities to open the connection, and moreover, you may have some initialization parameters which you may require across databases. You may have some initialization parameters which you may want to use across various ETL codes that you write. For example, if you see, various initialization parameters has been declared here, and these are constants which I want to use in all of my ETL codes. These kind of constants you should declare in initialization parameter, and these constants typically you should follow a convention where you declare most of these all of these constants in capital case. Here there is a mistake. Here I have some constants declared in small case. This is a wrong convention. Why you should have this capital case? Because if you are declaring certain initialization parameters which you are going to use in any of your code files, for example, this is a init.py, and here in the beginning, very beginning, what I'll do is have this initialization parameter file imported. Somewhere here, I'll write some code to open and read the initialization file, which I have done in my function calls here. So here you can see I can call the initialization parameters. The benefit of having all the initialization parameter in one file, which you want to use across multiple Python files, is you don't have to keep declaring it everywhere. And because these are initialization parameters, you should follow a convention that I will have all my initialization parameters which are constants declared in uppercase. By not mixing uppercase and smaller case, here as I mentioned, this is mistake. If I now go into any file and I make use of this variable, I as a programmer very clearly know that, hey, this variable, because it is in uppercase, in my code file I have not declared it anywhere, but I'm still able to use this variable. It is because it is part of my initialization init.py file. So that kind of clarity you will have while you're doing the code for ETL. These are certain best practices which you should be taking care of. I hope I have given a quick brief idea that's useful for you. I hope this broad overview of how we should write ETL code, how task initialization, audit tables, and generic utilities should be created would be a good basic understanding for all of you to get started with ETL and data engineering. With this short overview, I would like to end the session. Thank you. See you in our upcoming session where I would try to give more detail on my ETL codes which I have been writing, and probably with Pentaho, how ETL can be done is what I would aim to create videos for you people. Till then, bye bye. See you. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.